During one of my Red Dead Redemption 2 5 years later playthroughs, the topic came up, how would it end for our Red Dead Online characters? I did a similar video to this years ago for our GTA Online protagonists, but it was kind of the opposite. It was about our characters' origins, and to this day, people still leave comments talking about their protagonist's origin story in Grand Theft Auto Online. Originally, I was planning to do a similar video regarding our Red Dead Online character origin story, but I never got around to it. And long story short, Rockstar obviously has no intention of ever updating Red Dead Online except for these monthly events. In other words, the future for Red Dead Online continues to get dimmer and dimmer with each passing month. Live service games sort of require content and new updates, which is something that Red Dead Online has been lacking for a very long time now. So now we're going to talk about how it ends for our Red Dead Online characters. First off, I did put up a poll, and by the way, thanks to everybody that voted in the poll. And I also gave some of you the opportunity to submit your own fanfics about how things would end for your Red Dead Online character. Also, big thanks to all of you that submitted your own fanfics for how it would end for your character in Red Dead Online via the community post on YouTube, as well as our Discord. And here are the results for the Red Dead Online character ending poll. 72% of you said your character would ride off into the sunset. So the majority obviously want a happy ending for our Red Dead Online character, unlike Rockstar.
Pow!
13% went for a swing. In other words, hanged by the law. 7% dysentery, tuberculosis, cholera, venereal diseases. 5% predator cannibal food, and 3% of you voted lost a duel. Now let's talk about the submissions that we did get over on YouTube. Black Sky wrote, lives happily ever after in Tahiti. So I guess unlike the Vanderling gang, Black Sky's character actually made it to Tahiti. Next is DeForest, takes all the gold, money, clothing, horses, Crips camp to Guarma to start a new life and journey, maybe even a house that he could never get in Saint Denis or Strawberry. But he also sometimes returns to Cattail Pond to go fishing, so you might spot him around Strawberry. Everyone has a favorite fishing hole. I'm sure there's a few fishing spots in Guarma, plus some nice deep sea fishing as well. Rogue Raccoon, with the amount of people you've killed in Red Dead Online, I think they'll grow as old as Landon Ricketts and live long lives since they're all expert gunslingers. Sam Cullum's ending, ride off somewhere nice, if that's into the sunset, I don't know. Probably taking a swing sounds the most likely for your character, so it could go either way. They either ride off into the sunset somewhere nice, or they end up hanging. Now let's go over to Discord. UG Outlaw. How my Red Dead Online character ends. After years of bounty hunting and making some money and making some friendships along the way, sadly most of his friends have either died or moved on, so he feels that there's nothing left to do in life besides buy a small shack outside Armadillo and wait for his time to end. Hopefully it's far enough outside Armadillo where they don't catch cholera. I hear that's a pretty nasty way to go. Next, it's Kane. I would like to think my Red Dead Online character would escape America after the events of Red Dead Online, move somewhere low-key like British Egypt. Despite escaping America, by the time of the Great War coming around, he would be drafted to fight the Ottoman Empire. He'd live to see a few battles during the Sinai and Palestine campaigns, but he would eventually fall during the Battle of Nazareth. Going from outlaw to war hero, I think that's a good redemption arc, and a good ending too. Next is Brian, my Red Dead Online character ending. She finds out that Horley kills her parents. Horley's secret raised her as like a daughter. She kills him. She tells the truth to Leclerc. Horley and her plan to kill your husband. Then Jessica pulls her gun to kill Natasha. That, by the way, is Brian's character, Natasha. Now there's a gunfight between Jessica and Natasha. Natasha wins the gunfight. She walks to Jessica to finish her off. Jessica's last breath is, I will see you in hell. She puts a bullet in her head. She leaves America, becomes a big-time mercenary for hire, does jobs in Mexico, Middle East, Russia, Japan, became rich, and broke many men's hearts. In 1909, Natasha did some jobs for Sadie Adler in South America. 1910, she came back to America. She starts a business in Blackwater, and then she changed her name to keep a low profile. One day while hunting in tall trees, she saw a man. This man was asking a question about her. Quote unquote, "You look familiar from this photo. This woman is in Sitka Penitentiary, but she escaped, and she kills people like Coralie, Jessica Leclerc, and many others. Are you Natasha Romanoff?" She replied, "Nope, my name is Ellie Williams. You made a mistake with someone else, pal, but what's your name?" He replied, "My name is Edgar Ross. You killed Horley because you killed your parents, and now you're a retired mercenary. One more job, then you're out, and you have a clean slate." Natasha says, "Fuck no and fuck you." It became a gunfight, and then a secret agent came out of the blue to help Ross. She got shot by Ross and the agent. She on the ground, then Ross walked towards Natasha to finish her off. Natasha's last moment is she flips the bird to Ross. Then Edgar Ross puts a bullet in her head. She got killed by Edgar Ross. Rest in peace, Natasha Romanoff, 1877 to 1910. Next is Ben. My guy probably crushed his horse into a tree and hit his head on a rock. He was goofy like that. Oh, so many times our horses have crashed into trees and tripped over sticks or rocks in Red Dead Online. You know, that's probably the most realistic way that a lot of our characters ended up dying. Next, we go to Red the 8-Bit Dinosaur with his character's ending. My Red Dead Online character, probably after her life as a gun to hire, moved to Blackwater to start a security business to give farmers and traders security against gang members, outlaws, and robbers. After the Blackwater Massacre, she turned this event into huge profits, giving support to law enforcement, and with the expanding into a huge industry of its own. In the early 1900s, she decides to help with the rapid growing of civilization and helps to expand it. If her firm is not killing outlaws, it's hiring them with good payouts and even pardons for past crimes. It's a good deal for the fortunate ones. This firm turns into a massive PMC and still in operation to this day. Since back then women's rights were poor, she never registered formally for her firm and was registered by a name of someone that never existed. Even with the polemic, she was one of the first female millionaires. Her firm, Academia, is still in operation to this day. And finally, let's go to Tank Engine Jr., who wrote a bit of a novel. To be fair, I didn't have a limit on how much you could write. Maybe I should have, but that's on me. Going back to Tank's ending for his character. Well, my Red Dead Online character, Nicholas, I think would go to live a reckless life throughout his early 20s, still hurting from the love dying young. He'd have no will to live and would weeks getting drunk in the local saloon or gambling his cash away in poker games. He lived in a shack in the bayou just outside Saint Denis for his reckless period until one bad poker game took the last of his money. He was blinded by the booze and his own anger and shot the guy who won the pot. Realizing what he had done, he had fled the city and left behind his shack in the swamps and became a wanderer, picking up odd jobs in towns or taking the occasional bounty, usually bringing the victim back dead. He tried his damnedest to get himself killed, but some miracle he stayed alive. Eventually, he started traveling north and found himself in the luxury resort town of Ansburg. Obviously sarcasm there. He was tired of running, so with the money he earned, he rented out a shack amongst the local coal miners. This is where he stayed for a year or two. He occasionally picked fights with the miners when one of them made a snarky comment, or he thought one of them looked at him funny. He hoped he'd die in his sleep by breathing in all the totally clean and fresh air of Ansburg. Until one day, while he was out hunting, he heard screams that came from in the forest. He got curious and found a young girl who was captured by the Murphy brood. He had no reason to save her and turned away, but it was too late. Some of the Murphys saw him and took him by gunpoint to their small hideout, but he managed to shoot his way out, not without a scar though. One of the Murphys sliced his right cheek with pretty good with a knife. Annoyed by this encounter, he turned away to lick his wounds, but the girl begged for his help. He eventually caved and escorted the girl back to his cabin in Ansburg, and well, let's just say they got busy. A few months later, his son was born, and he had mixed emotions. Could he support a family? He wasn't exactly employed. He'd be damned if he'd have to work in a dirty mine. He was at a crossroads and didn't know what to do. While pacing around Ansburg, some shady individuals rode into town with big iron to their hip. He overheard one of the men mention something about a robbery. Realizing he wasn't meant to hear this conversation, he tried to slip away, but another one of the men stopped him in his tracks. but fortunately for the protagonist, the strange men cut him a deal. They needed one more man for the robbery to go off without a hitch, and so given the choice between getting gutted or tag along, he decided to join their team. The robbery went terribly wrong. They were robbing a train filled with valuables that made a pit stop in Annesburg. Honestly, a bit dumb to rob a highly guarded train in the town you're living in. The train was way more guarded than the three strange men predicted. During the bloodbath, 2 of the men died and the leader was arrested. Nicholas, in a desperate attempt to escape, drove the train out of town, but only made it down the long line to Van Horn before the train derailed. He hopped off and ran into the woods. He laid low in Butcher's Creek for a few weeks. He made it out with all the money, but he couldn't show his face in Annesburg, where his family was staying. He made a gut-wrenching choice and abandoned his son and lover. He headed west as he heard fairy tales and stories of how New Austin was still truly free and wild. Eventually, he arrived in Valentine and got a room. He took in his surroundings and liked what he saw. The lush green open fields of the Heartlands looked much more appealing to them than any desert, so he decided to stay for a few months. I'd like to think that he witnessed Arthur beating the shit out of Tommy during this time in Valentine, but eventually some bounty hunters came into town asking about Nick, so he left in a haste, going with his original plan, which was to flee to the west to New Austin. He arrives in Armadillo to some Del Lobos terrorizing the town. Nick inserted himself into the conflict, dealing with the Del Lobos. This sparked a rivalry between the gang and Nick, which carries on for a few years. Until one day, one of the Del Lobos challenged him to a duel. Feeling cocky, Nick accepted the challenge. The duel was quick, but it had 2 casualties. The Del Lobo was younger and quicker than Nick, but Nick was more accurate. The Del Lobo drew his gun first and shot Nick in the gut, but Nick still managed to get a headshot off on the young gang member. Nick slowly bled out and died on the streets of Armadillo. His corpse lay there for days before eventually being thrown into one of the many mass graves around town. He died in 1907, age 34, lost among the sick bodies. Anticlimactic ending, but not all of us get a storybook ending. Maybe it's fitting considering he left his lover and newborn son to fend for themselves. That's all, folks. Yay for novels. Once again, thanks everyone that took the time to submit your fanfics on how it would end for your characters, as well as those of you that voted in the polls. With that being said, I guess it's my turn. I have 3 characters to tie up loose ends for. Paula, Janine, my Xbox character, Wolfus, my PlayStation character, as well as Emmett, McFly, my long-lost PC character. Let's start off with Emmett McFly. So, yeah, I did have a PC character. His name was Emmett McFly, and the fanfic was he was like I guess a grandson of Marty McFly, because Riley and I are both into Back to the Future, and somehow he ended up lost in 1898. Okay, so how does it end for Emmett McFly? Well, he's obviously named after Doc Emmett Brown. So Doc Brown finds out about Emmett McFly being lost in time and eventually finds him and brings him back to whatever present day Emmett McFly happens to be from. So Emmett managed to, I guess, have a somewhat low profile while in the Wild West, and he heard stories from a decade prior of his godfather, Doc Brown, in 1885 out in California, which is why Emmett wanted to go back in time to begin with. Now let's talk about Wolfus, who's technically the great-great-great-great-grandpappy of my GTA PlayStation character, Wolfstein. Obviously, somewhere along the way, Wolfus hooked up with someone, and they had a child, which eventually leads to Wolfstein. But how did it end for Wolfus? Despite all the gold, despite all the cash, Wolfus still hanged out at the camp with Crips until one day Wolfus died of boredom because he was sick and tired of Crips going on and on for the bazillionth time about the Tennessee bank job. I guess it's a bittersweet ending because, yeah, Wolfus dies out in the field somewhere. Maybe it's on the Great Plains. Maybe it's up in the mountains, you know, with that beautiful view with the wildflowers. But part of Wolfus does live on because he did have a child, and that child ends up inheriting his fortune, and so the fortune becomes part of the Wolfus family legacy, all the way to my GTA Online PlayStation 5 character, Wolfstein. My third and final Red Dead Online character over on the Xbox, Paula Janine, Paula, by the way, was my mom's name, so that's why I named her Paula Janine, because when I created the character, I didn't realize it at the time, but she resembled my mom. And it was very eerie because my mom died when she was very young and when I was extremely young, so I never got to know her, but I have lots of photos of my mom. And yeah, I looked at a photo one day, and I'm like, wow, she looks almost exactly like my mom. So it's like I created her subconsciously to look like my mom. And I've always liked using the Janine name for many characters, like specifically my Xbox GTA Online character, Janine. But she also has a sister named Cynthia. So it's like two sisters over on Xbox. And Paula Janine is their great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandma. Similar to, like Wolfus and Wolfstein, the lineage there. So how does it end for Paula Janine? Well, a little bit better than Wolfus. She ends up sneaking across the San Luis like I've tended to do in Red Dead Online, going outside the map. She crosses the river into Mexico, takes her vast fortune with her, and is never seen again. Many generations later, her family would settle in Liberty City. Eventually, Janine and Cynthia would be born, and then they would end up out in southern San Andreas in Los Santos. In other words, Paula Janine did get a happy ending. I guess she found some guy out there, perhaps a wealthy farmer in Mexico, or maybe she wandered off to Spain or Europe. But that's the fanfic ending for all three of my characters, Wolfus, Emmett McFly, as well as Paula Janine. And now it's your opportunity to let us know how it ends for your character in Red Dead Online below in the comments section.